Good morning to everyone. My report today is all about the haiku, and I knew that we are all familiar with this. A traditional Japanese haiku is a three-line poem with 17 syllables, written in a 5-7-5 syllable count, often focusing on images from nature. Haiku emphasizes simplicity, intensity, and directness of expression. During the samurai period in the 17th century, Matsuo Bashop developed and perfected the haiku from the crude prosodic from Heiki, which is originally used colloquial language. Haiku began in 13th century as Japan the opening phrase of renga, an oral poem generally 100 stanzas long, which was also composed syllabically. The much shorter haiku broke away from renga in the 16th century and was mastered a century later by Matsuo Basho, who wrote this classic haiku, an old pond, a frog jumps in, the sound of water. As a form evolved, many of its regular traits, including its famous syllabic pattern, has been routinely broken. However, the philosophy of haiku has been preserved. The focus on a brief moment in time, a use of provocative, colorful images, an ability to be read in one breath, and a sense of sudden enlightenment. The haiku is rhymeless, short 17-syllable poem which is intended to express and evoke emotion. It is shorter than tanka, a short lyric poem which expresses an impression on 5 lines. Using the free verse, Japanese haiku writers alternated lines of 5-7-5 syllables in 3 lines as rhythm to capture the highest moments, emotion, or impression. Haiku is characterized with varying qualities from swallow or deep formal, heavy or flippant, humorous or sad, religious or satirical. Yet, in its brevity, it is able to capture fleeting moments. Hence, it is recognized as an aspect of Zen meditation, Buddhism, emphasizing the world in its natural state and a man as an integral part of nature. Next bullet is the haiku makes one aware of nature, a keen observer of nature, and evokes in him to see what is unnatural or freak in nature. The person or observer imitative and depth is achieved. Masters of haiku use picture painting words or sensory words that assault the senses, thereby suggesting the mood and establishing a starting point for traits of thought. The third bullet is the main objective of haiku writing is to show awareness of senses through nature. A mood is captured and vivid imagery is implied. A subtle falling of leaves suggests autumn, and a crow perching on a bare snowy bough indicates winter. Next slide is Basho's technique in haiku writing is prominently written in a new style, and his verses were taken as a model by haiku poets. Taking a close look at most of his haikus, the following elements or patterns can be observed. For example, an old silent pond. A frog jumps into the pond. Splash, silence again. We can see that the first line produces a distinct mood or emotion by description or vivid imagery. The second line presents a movement or action. And the third line usually is the reaction or result of the movement, which may be a sound or imagery that completes the picture. The next slide is the famous Japanese haiku masters, or what they so called the Great Four. They are Matsuo Basho, Hyosa Buson, Masao Kashiki, and Kobayashi Isa. Matsuo Basho, 1644 to 1694, was one of the greatest Japanese poets. He elevated haiku to the level of serious poetry in numerous anthologies and travel diaries. The name of Matsuo Basho is associated especially with celebrated Gengoku era, 1680 to 1730, which saw the flourishing of many of Japanese greatest and most typical literary and artistic personalities. Although Basho was contemporary of writers like the novelist and the poet Ihara Saikaku and the dramatist Chikamatsu Monzaimon, and he was far from being exponent of the new middle-class culture of the city dwellers of that day. Rather, in his poetry and in his attitude toward life, he seemed to harken back a period some 300 years earlier. An innovator in poetry, spiritually and culturally, he maintained a great tradition of the past. The next slide is Buson, also called Yosa Buson. Original surname Taniguchi, was born in 1716 in Kemasetsu Province, Japan. Died in January 17, 1784 in Kyoto, Japan. Japanese painter of distinction but even more renowned as one of the greatest haiku poets. Boson came of a wealthy family but chose to leave it behind to pursue a career in the arts. He traveled extensively in northeastern Japan and studied haiku under several masters. The next slide is Masao Kashiki, September 17, 1867 to September 19, 1902, was the pen name of a Japanese author, poet, literary critic, and journalist in Meiji period Japan. His real name was Masaoka Tsunenori, but as a child was called Toko Ronosuke. Later, he changed his name to Noboru. Shiki was a strong advocate of modernization of Japanese poetry, introducing the terms of haiku to replace standalone hokku and tanka to replace the 31 morawaka. The fourth one is Kobayashi Nobuyuki or Isa was born in Kashiwabara, Shinano Province to a farming family and began writing his childhood, which was marred by misfortune and sadness. His mother died and his father remarried, resulting in torment at the hands of his stepmother and stepbrother. In 1777, he was dispatched to Tokyo to study the haiku form under such masters as Sogan and Chikuwa. He was forced to support himself by taking menial jobs before gaining entry into Katsushika Poetry School. At the age of 28, he was to be given a teaching post at the school, but lasted just a year after it became clear that his modern style of haiku did not suit the clerical confines that were expected to him. To conclude my report, the haiku, a 17-syllable verse form divided into successive phrases or lines of 5, 7, and 5 syllables, originated in the link verse of the 14th century, becoming an independent form in the latter part of 16th century. And haiku developed and raised to the level of literature can be attributed to the introduction of haiki in 15th century. Haiki means lighted heart or free verse became the stepping stone to haiku. That's all. Thank you for listening.